Welcome to Never Again is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. Today we are going to speak with the co-founders of a grassroots group of Jewish women in Austin, Texas, who are taking action against anti-Semitism and hate speech. I am Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I am featured in the documentary about anti-Semitism Never Again is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I emigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler-Miller, the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project, ThinEdgeOfTheWedge.com. I grew up in Elgin, Illinois, a Midwestern town in which the few Jews were all descendants of Jews who had escaped the Tsar. It was not a Holocaust community. And yet, 25 years after the end of World War II and the Holocaust, my husband and I, who's an Army officer, were stationed in Munich, Germany, and this changed our lives forever.
Sharyn Vane is the co-founder of the Austin-based advocacy group ATX Kind. She writes about books, publishing, and censorship for the Austin American Statesman and Book and Film Globe. She has 3 decades of journalism experience at news outlets in Washington, D.C., Colorado, Florida, and Texas. Mariette Hummel is the co-founder of the Austin-based advocacy group ATX Kind. The group was created to address an increase of anti-Semitic incidents in the Central Texas community. She's originally from the Netherlands, like me, where she worked as a journalist and where her family still lives. She now serves as the Chief Communications Officer at a local nonprofit in Austin. ATX Kind is a grassroots group of Jewish women formed in the wake of recent anti-Semitic incidents and hate speech in Austin, Texas. They came together to create a space for all to celebrate kindness with inclusive action. Ladies, welcome to our show. We're thrilled to have you on.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to ask the first question to Mariette, which is, what was the inciting incident or string of incidents that caused the two of you to start this organization?
I would say it was definitely a string of incidents, but it started with an incident at a local high school where Jewish students, high school students, were targeted with anti-Semitic and anti-LGBT slurs on their assigned parking spaces. We were very shocked by that was happening. It was such a targeted and a bold attack. But we weren't seeing a reaction from leaders in the community. There were no statements coming out condemning it. We saw very little action from the school district. So we started talking, and I was actually talking to 5 other Jewish women simultaneously who did not know each other, but I knew each of them. And we were all, we said we were all equally pissed off, if I can say that. We said we were the equally pissed off Jews. As we were talking, separately still, more started happening. Neo-Nazis from a neo-Nazi group from California came to Austin and stood in the Jewish neighborhood at a bridge with, during rush hour, a very busy highway through Austin, and held a sign that had anti-Semitic slurs on them. They were doing the Nazi salute at the highway. They were wearing swastikas on their shirts. And again, we were not seeing much of a response. There was even an Austin police officer who was trying to de-escalate the situation, but in doing so, he was live streamed on the neo-Nazis platform, fist bumping one of the swastika wearing neo-Nazis. So we started getting more and more upset about the lack of response from all kinds of leaders, from the school district, from the city, from even in the Jewish community, because there's been this tradition, I think, at least that I've seen here in the US, of let's just not talk about it. Let's not give it oxygen. And that worked, because you don't want to give anti-Semitism and neo-Nazis oxygen, but they don't need us to give them oxygen anymore. They're online, they have their way of getting it out. And if we keep not talking about it and condemning it and standing up against it as a community, then they have their oxygen and their space. And a lot of people who are not Jewish are not aware of what's going on or how much it hurts us. So with that anger and that demand for action, we got together. So we really started as a Facebook messaging group, and we called ourselves first Equally Pissed Off Jews, and later we said we probably can't brand ourselves as that, so we should probably come up with a better name. And we wanted to battle hate with kindness, so that's why we called ourselves ATX Kind. And we wanted to be inclusive, not just for the Jewish community, but also other groups that are targeted by hate, as we've seen in the past. And then we used that platform, a messaging platform, to organize a rally at the Capitol here in Texas in 2 weeks' time. So we had a congressman speaking, the mayor, city council, community leaders, and about hundreds of people showed up. And it was just a wonderful event, but our work was not done. I'm sure that we'll talk more about that, but then we just went from there.
Thank you. But let's talk about the city itself, especially for those of us who've never visited Austin, Texas. What kind of city is it? Is it a place that you expect to find a great deal of anti-Semitism, or would you say traditionally it's a more inclusive place?
Well, I
Are
think
you asking Sharyn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sharyn.
Yeah, I think Austin has this reputation of being a kind of liberal oasis in the middle of very staunchly Republican Texas, which I think in a lot of ways is true. What folks who don't live here may not realize is that in the big cities, as well as Austin, there's actually a kind of thriving Jewish community along with other diverse populations. Galveston was the second biggest port of entry for Jews into the US after Ellis Island. It's actually how my husband's family came to the US from Eastern Europe over 100 years ago.
There's a famous play, I've seen it, that starts in Galveston. I don't remember the name, but I just realized I knew that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a rabbi who would come down every day to meet the ships and meet all the Jewish immigrants who are coming. At that time, they thought Galveston was going to be the next big boom town. It ended up being Houston, which has a much bigger Jewish population than Austin does. But, the thing about Austin is there are a lot of progressive folks here, a hugely diverse community. But because we are in Republican Texas, there are a lot of conservative folks as well. So it's kind of a crossroads, especially with the Capitol being here.
Sharyn, what actions has your organization taken so far?
So Mariette talked about the rally being a starting point, and we used that to start meeting with city officials and really thinking about what would our next steps be. It was such a great day. It was a moment in time when we all stood together and said, we're not going to stand for this. But as we've unfortunately seen over the past year with the rise in anti-Semitism, it's not enough to just talk about it. We have to turn those words into action. So we've really focused our energies on a couple of different areas. Improving our city's reporting system so that they can more effectively capture hate incidents along with hate crimes, to really talk about better training for our law enforcement community in order so that they're aware of these new tactics that some of these extremist groups are using relative to what Mariette was talking about on the bridge. Don't be an unwitting pawn because of social media. We need to make sure law enforcement's aware of that and ready to respond. And then also to talk about public education campaign. I think over the years we've seen, differing attention in schools to anti-bullying, anti-hate, but hate speech in schools and hate speech out in the community really requires a different response. And we really wanted to push our city to stand up to anti-Semitic hate as well as all other forms of hate against marginalized communities.
Is it okay if I add something, Phyllis? I just wanted to add that as Sharyn was talking about what we're seeing in schools, we sort of became this unofficial support system for Jews in Austin. So we are hearing a lot about what's happening. And lately we're hearing a lot about incidents in schools. So kids, students who are not really understanding what they're doing and what they're saying, and that is increasing. One of the when with the inciting incident at the high school, we had a conversation, Sharyn and I, with the principal, and the principal sort of offhandedly mentioned the swastikas that have been, in restrooms for years, and we clean it off and keep the students out for a bit and send them back in, and we said, what? So it has just been normalized. And I think we are trying to say, no, it's not something that you can just ignore and say it's the same as writing anything on the wall, or or often anti-Semitic incidents targeting Jewish students are treated as bullying. But it's not just bullying, it points to bigger issues with a culture problem in that school. And that needs to be addressed at large, because what I'm seeing in a difference being a Dutch Jew and someone living here is that they're not, here in Texas at least, what I'm seeing, parents are not really talking about it at home. Even in non-Jewish families in the Netherlands, you were very much aware of what happened, at least when I was growing up in
You're
the 90s.
talking about the Holocaust, just to make it clear to our audience.
The Holocaust and World War II and anti-Semitism and what happened. Even when your family wasn't affected by it, then maybe someone or you just heard about it. We have May 4th in the Netherlands. So during that time, as children, you would see these documentaries on TV. And I think that's, at least here, it's not the same right now. So when they hear something about the Holocaust or Jews at school, they have no context. So they go home and they look online, and they may end up on the wrong websites and hearing things that make their ideas worse about what they're already thinking. And then they influence other kids at schools. There's kids doing Nazi salutes in the hallways right now in schools here in Austin. So we've become a support system for these stories as well.
I think that's very important, a distinction. We have two Dutch Jews on this program to say that the difference between what kids grow up knowing about the history of, forgetting just the Holocaust, even World War II, and what Europeans grow up is so different. And we have such a lack of education in the United States. Evelyn?
So Mariette, what actions do you plan in the near future?
So we plan to continue to work with the city of Austin, because it took a lot of time to get to this point. It took a year to get to the point of starting to see the beginnings of action. So the beginnings of change in the reporting system, the beginnings of a public education campaign. It has not happened yet. It has not been created yet. So we're going to keep focusing on that. We have to make sure that we stay at the forefront of people's minds here at the city, with the community, with the schools, that we keep talking to them. Sharyn and I've been having conversations with the school district about inclusion in schools as well. We push very much for inclusion when it comes to holidays, when it comes to Holocaust Remembrance Week, just making sure that education is there. Because we have a great concern about radicalization among young people. And that's also what we saw. So there was one incident that we actually forgot to mention. In that string of incidents, it kind of culminated in this very large incident that was very damaging for the community in a synagogue. So a synagogue was set on fire. The neo-Nazis were still in town, and around that same time, a young, a teen, I believe he was in his late teens, had this, what they call flash radicalization, and he'd been reading stuff online, and all of a sudden he decided to take action, and he drove over to one of the synagogues here and set it on fire. They will never be able to repair it the way it was. So they're facing millions of dollars in damage, and a real it really damaged a feeling of security and safety in the community as well. And it was such a direct attack. And so that's something that we're also very much focusing on, like, where does this begin and what are we watching for? So we're approaching it from many different sides. We're approaching it from the city level, the school level, and working with Jewish communities, making sure the reporting system gets better, making sure that people know how to report. That's been one thing that we keep putting out there is, this is when you see something, when you hear something, this is where you go. You report it on the ADL website, and you call in here in Austin 311, or you go and report it online. Because while we work on how that reporting gets to the right people on the back, on the back end of it, we need to also make sure that all community members do their part and actually call it in. So
Yeah, I mean,
and Mariette, I'm wondering, what is a Californian neo-Nazi group doing in Austin, Texas? Why did they come there?
Was it the Going Defense League? Is that who it was?
that's who it was. Yes.
But they also hung these barriers on the 405 here in Los Angeles.
They did. Yeah. I mean, they came to different Texas cities, the Jewish, and this is part of what we're pushing for. So the Jewish leaders here in Austin knew it was coming, but the Jewish community did not. And there's something to say for that, but also against it. We want to make people more aware. So we don't know why exactly they came. They may have thought that they could influence some people here. They may have thought that it was a good time to come here. They actually celebrated Halloween here, and they went to a Central Texas town and dressed up in horribly anti-Semitic costumes and handed out candy to kids. So just in the streets there, and they live streamed that. So they just, it happened here. And we asked, is this all related? And they said it's probably not. What was happening in the schools and what was happening at the same time here in Austin was not actually related to them being here, but it was just this weird perfect storm for anti-Semitism that happened here. We've also seen over the past year, we've seen this continuation of flyering, and Sharyn has some really good information on that, but in parks, at schools even, anti-Semitic hateful flyers that are being put in people's driveways in little bags. I'm sure
we have it here. Yes.
Yeah, so we've continued to see that as well.
Well, and I think, you talked about how the banner, the folks behind the banners we saw here in Austin are also behind, banners that happened in California and other places. Same thing with the flyers. This group certainly has a national reach and chooses to kind of go around fomenting fear with their little flyer campaigns. To Mariette's point about, we need to capture all of those events, because if you're a member of the Jewish community or the non-Jewish community, and you come outside and you see an anti-Semitic hateful flyer in a baggie with rocks on your porch, you want to make sure somebody knows about it. And maybe you don't need a policeman to come out to your house that day, but you want to make sure that the area you live in is, where is this increasing? Are there neighborhoods where this is happening more frequently? How can we kind of scale a response to reflect the fact that we're seeing increased activity here in our city? And that's why we push reporting so much. I also want to harken back to something Mariette talked about how oftentimes the leaders of our Jewish community organizations are aware when these groups are coming. And I think in the past, there has been this sense of, don't say anything, don't create panic, it'll freak people out if they know. And I understand that viewpoint, but I also think at the stage we're at right now, it's almost more helpful to know, okay, we know they're coming, we might see this week, here's what I'm gonna do. If I get a flyer, I know exactly where to call, I know what to do, I know what not to do. One of the things that we've really been pushing through our ATEX Kind platform is call 311, call it, report on ADL, the online platform, take a picture of the flyer if you can. Don't post the flyer on social media.
Yes.
Let's not, I think it's a really natural and normal reaction to be like, this is awful. Look what was on my porch. I want to share it with all the people on my feed so they know that this hate is out there. That's a really normal human reaction. But unfortunately, that is a time when you're helping them spread your message. So here's where to send that, post about the fact that you found something, but don't post the actual message. Those are the kind of messages that we're certainly trying to put out in our community. And I think as a result, that is why we end up being kind of the a go-to point for several of our community members who see us kind of trying to raise awareness, and they see us as someone who's interested in knowing more and hearing about what's happening with folks. And so our DMs and our texts light up with, did you know this happened? Have you heard about this? And that's wonderful. We're happy to do it, but it needs to be a more a widespread effort.
We're trying to
not just be
encourage,
steps, right?
yeah, we're trying to model it for the city almost. So when we put that message out, we're trying to tell Jewish leaders and city leaders, okay, we do still tell people not to give it oxygen, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't know about it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't say it's coming or that it's happening. Just don't post the picture. And we've been lucky that we've gotten some attention and we've been able to spread this message via media. And that's another thing we've been working on, is working with local media who have been told time and time again by leaders, don't talk about anti-Semitism, just don't give it oxygen. And so we're also approaching them and saying, okay, let's find a different way to talk about it, because it needs to be talked about. Because if people don't know what's happening and only those who are targeted by it know what's happening, then it can keep spreading, and there's this sort of silent spread that's not controlled. And that's what scares us a lot.
Right.
Yeah,
And it also makes me think of I had a pink Star of David graffitied at my front door when I was still in Amsterdam, living in Amsterdam. And my first reaction was, I was in shock, but my first reaction was not to report it. I was too much in shock by it. So I wanted to forget it. I wanted to move on, you know? And then after a while, I really forgot about reporting it. So I think it's important. What you just said at the beginning is very important. If you find flyers at your porch or something like that, immediately report it through your website, for instance. We as individuals shouldn't be silent about what we experience in terms of anti-Semitism, and also, of course, the authorities and the media shouldn't be silent about it.
And I want to just say, someone here in LA told me that he lives in kind of a cul-de-sac, and he came out one morning to walk his dog and he found all those flyers. And I said, well, did you report it? And he said, no, what would the police do? He said, I went around and picked up all the ones so the other people wouldn't be upset. But you see, if he didn't report it, then people don't realize that that particular neighborhood was targeted. So yes, the police probably aren't the answer in this particular case, but how do we encourage people to tell the appropriate authorities? It's really,
and that's something that we've really been working on. We try to message it as we need to track these incidents. And one other thing that we've been talking about, it's really hard to prosecute hate incidents or hate crimes in Texas because of laws around it. But we've also been meeting with the local DA, and what he also says is that it's really important to track every incident, because you never know if the culmination of the flyering of incidents, and maybe they have camera footage that they can get, maybe it could result in charges. So if you think this one flyer is not going to get the police out here, still make sure that it gets reported to authorities. You may not get an immediate response, but that's not the point. The point is that it gets tracked, that on a city level, county, even national level, we know where this is happening, because the ADL feeds it back into a national database. But also that local authorities know it's happening and have the ability to prosecute. For example, if somebody does end up committing violence and has been doing this first, maybe they can track it down. You never know what they can do with these incidents when they do get reported. So we really tell people, report everything that you see that happens, whether it's a flyer in a park or a bag with anti-Semitic language in a driveway, graffiti, and also incidents in schools. You know, we think it's important that when something happens in a school, it's not just, oh, you know, my child got bullied, but no, my child specifically got bullied with hateful language. And that way it can go to the district, the ADL, local ADL can get involved with their education coordinator and do some programming. It just really needs to be named. It needs to be made clear what's happening.
Yeah, sure. And one other thing I want to add here is one individual flyer might, you know, you might think, oh, that's not worth reporting. But we know when we ignore these things, they tend to escalate. And so you don't want to wait to the point where they're setting fire to a synagogue, like happened in our city. To truly have our hands around this sense of what is happening in our city. We're thinking locally, but this would be true for anyone in any municipality or neighborhood. You want to have an accurate picture of what's happening. And even if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime that's chargeable, you don't want this kind of thing happening. And to do nothing, to just let it go, I think just enables more of it. When there's zero response from the city or zero acknowledgement that this happened and we're not going to stand for it. And it also gives people something concrete to do. It can feel so powerless, like, they flyered our whole neighborhood. What do? I can't fight anti-Semitism as this big amorphous thing, but I can let the authorities know and ADL know that this happened and add my voice to the mix.
And I would also say that the people who do it, they talk about it. So there was one incident at a local school where a person was handing out anti-Semitic or hateful flyers to students, and a student was confronting that person about it, and that person used, I think, pepper spray or something like that on the student. And then that person was seen online talking about this, like, hey, I got away with it. Nothing happened. This is what I could do in Austin, right? This is what I could do at a school, get away with it, basically encouraging others to do the same. So that is why it is so important that we speak out and that we say, this is not okay. And find every way to make that clear to whoever's doing it.
And have people been using your reporting system? I mean, have you seen an increase in reporting since you've been coaching people on using it?
I feel like we have seen increased attention around it. We're fortunate that the DA's office locally has kind of taken on the task of reporting it back out to the community, even though we're not at a place at the city level where they're ready to sort of start doing, a hate incident or hate crime dashboard, which I think is the ultimate goal. We've talked a lot about how it's almost, you got to put it out there that you're actually paying attention to it before people follow up and see interest. We're definitely seeing interest or additional reporting to us. And then we're funneling everybody to these two places to report, 311 and ADL. And in January 2023 is when we're expecting the first public report to come out from our DA's office about here are things that have been captured since August, when they started explicitly asking callers to 311, do you believe that your incident was the result of bias or hate? So we're hoping that once they start publicizing, hey, the city cares about this, we're focusing on this, we're reporting it, then more citizens and more community members will say, oh, I guess I should call that in because they care enough about it to put out a public report about what we're seeing. So I think we'll know more early 2023.
What is a hate crime dashboard?
So a hate crime dashboard would be a public facing tool that if I can just go on, let's say the City of Austin's website and know where I can go and see, this many bias incidents were reported last month. Here's neighborhoods where they were. Several cities do this really well. Chicago does it really well. Seattle does it really well. And we're really trying to get to the point at the city where we have enough data to have something like this that's regularly updated. People can look at it, know the kinds of incidents that are happening and where they're happening. Because if you have young kids and you know that, wow, this particular park has been targeted 4 times over the past 6 months with hateful flyers, I may want to pick a different park. You can make real-time decisions based on that, as well as just knowing what's going on.
And it will also encourage city leaders to take action, because a lot of people, we do have a sort of a concentrated Jewish neighborhood, although people are spread out, but that's where the JCC is at and most of the synagogues. And a lot of the other council members think this is not happening in my district. Oh. Well, we will be able to show once it's mapped out that this is also happening in your district. So please get on board and help us tackle this issue.
Yeah, it's a big fact assembling a project that you're doing, and that can be used in many ways and influence policies against anti-Semitism at some point. Mariette and Sharyn, can you tell us a little bit about your personal background, and if so, how that influenced the work you're doing for this project against anti-Semitism?
Sure. We've talked a lot about schools so far, and I would say one really driving event for me was when my younger son was targeted a couple of years ago by classmates in school. At the time, he wore a Star of David necklace. He also wore a yarmulke to school. And so it was pretty clear that he was Jewish. And in his yearbook, another student drew a swastika in his yearbook and wrote Heil Hitler. At one point in the locker room of his school, kids grabbed his yarmulke and started playing keep away with it, throwing it around and not giving it back to him. His Star of David necklace was broken. Other students told him, you should get in the air vents with the other Jews, and get the gas. So these are obviously horrifying things that happened. At that point, I really started paying attention to the rise in what I would say, sadly, is everyday anti-Semitism. I want to be clear. The kids who did this, almost all of them, were just regular kids, good kids, who in a lot of cases had zero sense of how hateful they were being. They knew they were being bullying, but they did not realize, whether because of a lack of education or lack of discussion at home, that this was completely unacceptable and hateful. And it does mark a change, right? My husband at the time, I remember vividly him saying to the school, in my 50 plus years on this earth, no one has ever said things to me like were said to my son. And that was kind of the seeds of something. So, when I ended up in the group with Mariette and we were talking about all these other things happening, it really fueled me to want to do what I can. I think that's a very Jewish response. How can we, what can we do? How can we fix things? And so Mariette was the perfect person to bring us together and channel us into action.
And that's an incredible story. And Mariette, what about you, your background, and did it play a role in starting this project?
I was raised very differently, and I'm raising my kids here right now, and it's a different environment. You experience anti-Semitism in the Netherlands. I once wore, I think it was either a Star of David or a menorah on a tram in Amsterdam, and these kids were calling me names and trying to take the necklace off of me, and that was when I was in my 20s or something, but I felt like I at least felt like we all knew there about the consequences of anti-Semitism, because we grew up with the stories, and at least that's changing now for kids in the Netherlands, because they're not the ones with the grandparents who survived the Holocaust or who didn't, or the stories about those who didn't survive the Holocaust. But I did, and I heard the stories, and I would say that what I was learning is that it was dangerous to be a Jew. Actually, it was dangerous back then. A lot of Jews didn't really want to talk about what happened during the war. And there was also some, fear about being openly Jewish, because, well, what if this happens again? Then they know I'm Jewish and they can get me. But we were all very much aware of what anti-Semitism was and what could happen if it was out of control. Yeah. And here, I was really startled by everyday anti-Semitism, as Sharyn is calling it, that people aren't even aware, kids, but even adults aren't aware of what they're doing what kind of emotions that could invoke with people who do know what it is, who do have family who were, who perished in the Holocaust, but also what it could lead to. They just seem to have no clue. And she talked a little bit about kids, but my experience was actually, I went to a church for the first time, an actual church service for the first time when I was in Texas, never went to one in the Netherlands, stepped into the church. And as I walked into the church, the preacher was talking about Jews in a very bad way. And I was just startled, because it wasn't outwardly, saying slurs or bad names or anti-Semitism in that way, but was basically just othering the Jews and saying, you don't want to be like the Jews, right? And the Jews think they're better than. And there was just a lot of language there that made me stop in my tracks. I never want to go into a church like this again, but just stop in my tracks and say, why is no one telling him to stop? Why is no one shocked? Why is no one understanding what this could lead to? And that really terrified me, raising my kids here. My son actually knows, he does know, because I talked to him about it when we drive out of the JCC, he sees the security guards and he says, they're there because not everybody likes us. And then he usually says, and also because of Nazis, because that's sort of what he knows. But I want him to be aware, and I do want him to be proud of being Jewish. But I also want the kids in his classroom to know that what being Jewish is, and how hurtful it can be when you say something about a Jew in a derogatory way or an othering way, even saying they're different in a bad way. So I'm really interested in raising that awareness, and I wish there was more education here. I wish there was more knowledge of what happened and how it affected people, and that it can always happen again, and that in some ways it is happening. I sat in front of my daughter's daycare 2 days ago, and I was telling Sharyn, I was actually messaging all of them, and I said, I can't leave. I mean, it's a Jewish daycare, and it's at the synagogue that was set on fire, and I sat there in the parking lot and I said, I can't drive away, because what if something happens? And they're getting, they're implementing bulletproof glass at lots of these daycares, which is horrifying. But I just sat there and I was just paralyzed, because it feels like, never again is now, because it can happen anytime. And it is here, it's happening, and we need to make people aware of it.
Absolutely. And as we bring to a close, we're going to give you last chance to say last words. But my title of my play, Thin Edge of the Wedge, that is what it is about. It's a British expression that you allow something to get so wide that it is too late to turn back. And I actually end the play with something like, it can happen anytime, anywhere, to any group of people, and that we all have to work against this. So little last words before we close. Either.
I would just say it's so important that we all have a clear-eyed look at what is happening right now. And it can be so tempting to want to ignore these small signs and say, well, we'll let it blow over. But maybe it's not going to blow over, and it's everyone's responsibility. Usually changes that we make in a society to help protect Jewish people help protect a lot of different marginalized communities. So I know we're talking about anti-Semitism here, but the changes we're making in Austin will help all marginalized communities who are victims of hate incidents and crimes. So it's really all of our responsibilities to come together and do whatever we can to make sure this tide turns back.
Yeah, I want to add to what Sharyn's saying, because that reminds me of what I think a New York Times columnist once wrote, and that is that, when anti-Semitism is happening in your community, you need to be very worried, because it is a sign of something, that could be problematic in many different ways for many different groups of people. And so I think it's really time to open our eyes and to open our ears and to really see what's going on and see what we can all do to stop, to educate each other, to educate our kids. I want to ask all parents to start talking to their kids about these things. When your child learns about the Holocaust, you're not a Jew, your child learns about the Holocaust or about Jews at school, try to have conversations at home so that they don't go on the internet to find information. Provide them, there's lots of great resources that are researched and approved that you can offer them so that they don't radicalize online. And I think that is so crucial, because that's what I'm most afraid of, is when we don't get a handle on the rhetoric and we don't educate our kids and the people around us, then really bad stuff can happen, and we need to stop it before it's too late.
Thank you so much for this really, really compelling talk. I encourage everyone to follow your advice, especially for parents. I just want to emphasize that non-Jewish parents also have a responsibility to educate their children. And so we need to educate the parents, to educate the children. We have a lot of work to do. Thank our guests and our listeners, and also for anyone that hasn't yet seen Evelyn's very powerful documentary, Never Again, It's Now. You can see it on Amazon and YouTube. You can learn more about my nonfiction theater project at thinedgeofthewedge.com. And as we end every episode, we say, whenever you can, without putting yourself in physical harm, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.